Some nights, silence feels heavier after finally seeing people exactly as they are. People called them distant after they stopped explaining themselves to everyone around them. Friends whispered that they had changed, become arrogant, emotionless, difficult, or strangely cold in ordinary conversations and familiar rooms that once felt emotionally safe. But most people never noticed what happened before the silence appeared. They never saw the years of emotional disappointment, hidden betrayal, manipulation disguised as kindness, or the exhausting pressure of constantly giving understanding to people who rarely returned it. Human beings naturally search for emotional safety through connection, honesty, and trust. When those expectations repeatedly collapse, the nervous system slowly begins protecting itself by reducing emotional openness, lowering vulnerability, and becoming more cautious around other people. What looks like coldness from the outside is often emotional fatigue from the inside. Some people did not stop caring because they lost empathy. They stopped expressing warmth freely because experience taught them how easily kindness can be misunderstood, exploited, or ignored. Many emotionally aware people become quieter after recognizing uncomfortable patterns in human behavior. They notice how some people only appear during moments of usefulness, how honesty can invite criticism, or how vulnerability sometimes attracts emotional control instead of genuine care. Society often praises sensitivity until it becomes inconvenient for others. The moment someone becomes more guarded, less available, or emotionally selective, they are suddenly labeled bitter, antisocial, dramatic, or emotionally damaged by the same people who benefited from their openness before. Over time, the person begins questioning themselves internally. They wonder whether becoming emotionally distant means something is wrong with them, even while their mind and body are simply reacting to prolonged emotional overstimulation, disappointment, and psychological self-protection. Sometimes coldness is not hatred toward humanity. Sometimes it is what remains after someone spent years trying to understand everyone else while nobody truly tried to understand them in return. The human brain constantly studies social experiences to predict emotional safety. When someone repeatedly experiences betrayal, rejection, dishonesty, or emotional inconsistency, the nervous system slowly adapts by becoming more alert, cautious, and emotionally restrained around people. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a protective adaptation rather than a personality flaw. The brain begins associating emotional openness with danger, embarrassment, exhaustion, or disappointment, especially after long periods of emotional stress without proper recovery or support. This process often affects the amygdala, which monitors emotional threats, and the prefrontal cortex, responsible for trust, emotional regulation, and decision-making. Under chronic emotional strain, the brain starts prioritizing protection over connection without the person consciously realizing it. People who became emotionally cold often still feel everything deeply internally. The difference is that their emotions no longer move outward as easily. They answer messages later, avoid unnecessary conversations, and quietly withdraw from environments that once drained their energy. In everyday life, this can look strangely invisible. Someone sits quietly at family dinners while observing everyone carefully. They laugh politely during conversations, yet feel emotionally detached inside, as though part of them stopped expecting genuine emotional closeness long ago. The nervous system can also become exhausted from prolonged emotional hypervigilance. Some people spent years analyzing facial expressions, monitoring emotional tension, calming conflicts, and anticipating disappointment until their mind eventually entered a state of emotional conservation and social fatigue. This is why emotionally exhausted people sometimes appear emotionally unavailable even when they still care deeply. Their internal system becomes overloaded, similar to a phone running too many applications silently in the background until the battery drains unusually fast. For some individuals, anxiety also plays a hidden role beneath emotional coldness. After enough painful social experiences, the brain begins expecting emotional harm automatically, making ordinary interactions feel mentally exhausting instead of comforting or naturally enjoyable. Depression can deepen this emotional shutdown further, not always through sadness, but through emotional numbness, low emotional reward, and psychological detachment. The person still participates physically in life, while internally feeling disconnected from warmth, excitement, or emotional intimacy. Even working memory and emotional processing become affected during chronic stress. Small conversations feel draining. Returning calls feels overwhelming. Responding emotionally begins requiring energy. The nervous system no longer believes it can safely afford to spend. Sometimes the coldness began in childhood, long before the person understood what emotional protection even was. They learned early that expressing feelings invited criticism, punishment, dismissal, or emotional unpredictability. So silence slowly became safer than honesty. Some grew up around people who only offered affection conditionally. Love arrived during achievement. Point 5, obedience, usefulness, or emotional convenience. 5, teaching the nervous system that connection could disappear the moment they became emotionally difficult or vulnerable. Others became cold after repeated exposure to manipulation disguised as care. They spent years comforting people who only reached out during loneliness, crises, or personal need, eventually realizing the relationship survived mostly through their emotional labor and quiet self-sacrifice. For deeply observant people, understanding human nature can become emotionally isolating. They begin noticing hidden motives behind compliments, subtle dishonesty during conversations, or how quickly loyalty changes when circumstances no longer emotionally benefit someone involved. Even ordinary situations start carrying emotional symbolism. An unanswered message feels heavier than a simple notification. An empty chair during difficult moments quietly reminds them who disappeared when life stopped being emotionally convenient or entertaining. Over time, emotional disappointment accumulates quietly inside the body. The nervous system stores tension through constant vigilance, restrained emotions, and psychological self-control until exhaustion transforms into emotional numbness that feels safer than continuous disappointment. Many emotionally cold people are secretly carrying unresolved grief beneath their distance. Grief for relationships that changed unexpectedly, for trust they once gave freely, or for older versions of themselves who still believed emotional honesty guaranteed emotional safety. Loneliness becomes complicated during this stage. They crave genuine understanding deeply, yet simultaneously fear emotional closeness because experience taught them how painful attachment can become when trust eventually fractures or emotional reality suddenly changes without warning. This creates an exhausting psychological conflict. Part of them wants connection, softness, and emotional intimacy again. Another part quietly scans every interaction for manipulation, inconsistency, hidden judgment, or signs that vulnerability may eventually become emotionally dangerous again. The emotional consequences slowly spread into daily life. Conversations become shorter. Social gatherings feel draining. Their room becomes a protective space where silence finally feels more emotionally manageable than constantly performing warmth for emotional, unpredictable environments. Eventually, many stop recognizing themselves completely. They remember being emotionally expressive once, loving more easily, trusting more naturally, and feeling emotionally alive around people before disappointment slowly transformed openness into caution and caution into emotional distance. What many people misunderstand is that shame rarely reconnects emotionally exhausted individuals back to warmth. Criticism often pushes them deeper into emotional withdrawal because their nervous system already feels overloaded, defensive, and psychologically unsafe around judgment. When someone repeatedly hears phrases like, "you've changed," "you're too cold," or "you overthink everything," the brain interprets those reactions as confirmation that emotional honesty will only create more misunderstanding rather than genuine emotional safety. Pressure also creates resistance inside the nervous system. The more someone feels emotionally cornered, controlled, or forced to perform connection artificially, the more their mind instinctively retreats inward to preserve a sense of emotional autonomy and internal stability. This is why some emotionally distant people appear calm externally while internally carrying enormous psychological tension. Their silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is emotional self-protection operating quietly beneath controlled facial expressions and carefully measured social behavior. Human behavior is rarely as simple as people want it to be. Emotional coldness can exist beside deep compassion. Detachment can exist beside sensitivity. Someone may care profoundly about others while simultaneously feeling unsafe, becoming emotionally open around them. Many emotionally aware individuals also become tired of superficial interactions. After understanding how often people hide intentions, mirror emotions strategically, or maintain performative social masks, shallow conversations begin feeling emotionally empty rather than emotionally nourishing. The nervous system eventually prioritizes emotional efficiency. Instead of investing energy everywhere, the person becomes selective with attention, trust, vulnerability, and emotional availability because experience taught them that not every connection deserves unrestricted emotional access. This perspective often gets misunderstood as bitterness, when in reality it can reflect psychological pattern recognition. The person is no longer reacting only to words anymore. They are quietly observing consistency, emotional accountability, intentions, and behavioral patterns over long periods of time. Black and white thinking makes this experience even more painful. People assume becoming colder means someone has completely lost softness forever, but human psychology does not usually operate through permanent emotional extremes, like people imagine during emotionally difficult periods. Sometimes emotional distance is simply an unfinished stage of recovery. The mind temporarily reduces emotional openness while trying to rebuild safety internally after prolonged disappointment, overstimulation, emotional betrayal, or years spent neglecting personal emotional boundaries for the comfort of others. Understanding this changes the emotional narrative completely. Instead of seeing themselves as emotionally defective, the person slowly begins recognizing that their coldness may actually reflect accumulated emotional survival responses rather than the absence of humanity or love. Healing often begins quietly, not through dramatic transformation, but through moments where the nervous system finally experiences safety without pressure, performance, or emotional manipulation for the first time in a very long while. Many emotionally cold people do not need harsher discipline or more criticism. They need environments where their mind no longer feels forced to constantly monitor danger, decode hidden intentions, or protect itself from emotional unpredictability every single day. The goal is not becoming emotionally open with everyone again. Real healing usually begins when someone learns they can protect their energy without emotionally disappearing from themselves completely in the process of surviving difficult human experiences. Small actions matter more than people realize during emotional recovery. Eating properly after emotional exhaustion, replying to one message honestly, stepping outside briefly, or allowing one safe conversation can slowly calm an overworked nervous system over time. The brain heals through repeated experiences of emotional consistency. A trustworthy friendship, predictable routines, gentle self-talk, quiet rest, or emotionally safe environments slowly teach the nervous system that connection does not always end in pain or emotional depletion. This process can feel frustratingly slow because emotional protection was built through repetition over many years. The nervous system cannot instantly abandon survival patterns that once helped someone emotionally endure disappointment, rejection, loneliness, or psychological overwhelm. Some days, the person may still feel emotionally detached from everyone around them. Healing does not always move in straight lines. There are moments where old caution returns automatically, especially after new disappointments or emotionally exhausting interactions with others. But emotional warmth often returns gradually in subtle ways first. The person laughs naturally without forcing it. Music feels emotionally meaningful again. They stop analyzing every silence during conversations and begin feeling slightly safer existing around other people. Over time, they realize they were never completely emotionless. Their emotions were simply buried beneath exhaustion, overstimulation, grief, and emotional self-protection that developed slowly after too many experiences taught them to emotionally brace against disappointment. Real healing is less about becoming the old version of yourself again and more about building a safer internal world. One where empathy can exist beside boundaries, where softness no longer requires self-destruction, and where caution no longer controls every connection. Like windows covered during a long storm, some people became cold, simply trying to survive emotional weather that never seemed to end. Their distance was never proof of emptiness. It was proof that their mind learned protection before it learned peace. And yet, even the coldest seasons eventually soften when safety slowly returns. Not all at once, but quietly, through small moments of honesty, calm connection, and the rare comfort of finally feeling emotionally understood without needing to explain everything. Maybe that is what healing truly looks like for people who understand human nature too deeply. Not becoming naive again, but learning that wisdom and warmth can still exist together without constantly fearing emotional betrayal or disappointment. There is nothing weak about protecting your inner world after carrying invisible emotional exhaustion for so long. The fact that you still desire connection beneath the distance already reveals that part of your humanity never truly disappeared. So if this video felt painfully familiar, know that many silent people are carrying the same invisible emotional weight behind calm faces, delayed replies, quiet rooms, and conversations that never fully reveal what they actually feel inside. And perhaps somewhere tonight, another emotionally tired person will read your story in the comments and finally feel less alone inside their own guarded silence. If this video helped you feel understood, gently like, share, and subscribe for more emotionally honest psychology stories that remind people their hidden struggles still deserve compassion, understanding, and quiet human connection. Until next time, take care of the parts of yourself that became cold simply because they were trying to survive.